Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jacqueline Blundell, and I'm the Associate Dean of Science for Research and Graduate Studies here in the faculty. Thank you for joining us today. I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that the lands on which Memorial University's campuses are situated are in the traditional territories of diverse Indigenous groups, and we acknowledge with respect the histories and cultures of the Beothuk, Mi'kmaq, Innu, and Inuit of this province. We encourage everyone to reflect on these lands from which you are located and the Indigenous peoples for whom these lands are traditional territories. I would like to apologize. My camera isn't working this morning, or this afternoon rather, despite frantic messages to IT. I was unable to get it up for this morning or this session. Nevertheless, I am very excited to welcome you all to our most recent On the Menu, which is our Lunch and Learn series, which is hosted by the Faculty of Science. On the menu is a full course meal covering a wide and comprehensive range of tasty topics. In the months ahead, we intend to offer a variety of these sessions, which we hope will be of interest to both faculty and students. So be sure to keep an eye out for our next event. We're also interested in hearing your ideas or suggestions for future On the Menu sessions. So please, if you can think of something of interest, feel free to submit it via the chat or email us at science@mun.ca. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome Julie Bowering, the Academic Program Officer graduate for the Faculty of Science. In this session, Julie will discuss tips on how to present your research to a non-academic audience. And for those of you who are here that are presenting to the 3MT next week, then I think this will be particularly relevant, although also relevant to both faculty and students alike. Before we get started, just a reminder to all participants to turn off your mics and that the session today will be recorded. Following the presentation, we will be entertaining questions from the audience. You can either write your question in the chat or write question in the chat and I will call on you. At that time, you will turn on your mic and camera if you'd like. I will remind everyone attending that we are also recording. So I think that covers all bases, I hope. Anyway, thank you, and I welcome Julie.
Thanks, Jacqueline. I'm going to share my presentation now. All right. So Jacqueline described the topic, and I know if you've seen the promo, you've seen the description. So there's all kinds of reasons why you'd want to present your research to a non-expert audience. So I'm going to cover here today. The timing is good, actually, because we have, as Jacqueline mentioned, a 3MT. Can't see the presentation. Okay, disregard. All right, I'm glad you can see it. So I think this is, Jacqueline mentioned the 3MT, so the timing is good for this presentation as well. So we're going to talk about generally presenting your research to a non-expert audience, but is particularly relevant for Research Week and also for the 3MT that's happening. So I'll talk a bit about presenting in general, more formally, informally, and I'll just start with a little introduction here. And feel free to interrupt at any time. I want this to be as informal and as helpful and as useful as possible. I'm not a formal presenter at all, but I do want you to get the information that you need. So feel free. So just starting with this question, what do you do? So we all hear this. You hear it at parties, you hear it at conferences, what do you do? And it's often a good way to start a conversation. Well, some people think it's a good way. I think we should think of some more imaginative ways to start conversations. But nevertheless, we are asked this a lot. It's common. And it's challenging. It can be challenging. I know myself. I think I know what I do, but I'm not sure if I could put it really succinctly. So I think it's important for everyone to be able to answer this question and explain it clearly. And as I mentioned here in this slide, um, it's important whether you're a scientist, researcher, or non-scientist. This is really, really important. You want to know, you want to be able to describe your work and to tell people about the impact of what you do. So we should all be able to describe our work clearly and confidently. What is a non-expert? Um, you know, this is not an exhaustive list by any means. So could be researchers outside your field. I think we've got someone with their mic open. Can you get you to mute your mic? Okay. Um, Researchers outside your field could be policy decision makers, government stakeholders, industry representatives, members of the general public, your family, friends. Essentially, this is anyone at all without specialized knowledge or expertise in a specific subject, field, or area. And that's the audience that we're targeting in this presentation. So it's not necessarily a lay audience, general public. It could be anyone. It could be another academic, another researcher, anyone at all. So why is this important? So in the description, in the description of the topic of the session, I talked about some of this. I think one of the most important benefit, or one of the most important things is it demonstrates the impact and potential benefits of your research, talking about it, and not just talking about it, but talking about it effectively, clearly, really gets the message out, the direct message. So, you know, a question, for example, you know, folks are always interested in, you know, can this solve a problem? Is this a solution? Can this contribute to society? There's all kinds of reasons why you would want to demonstrate that impact and the benefits. And that's, you can talk about your research, but sometimes it's more challenging to actually talk about the effects and what it means. Develop connections and partnerships. So building collaborative networks may contribute and provide feedback as well to your research. This is really, really important. It just allows other folks to get to know more about what you're doing. So interdisciplinary is a good example, working with people in other disciplines, industry, not-for-profits, and there's all kinds of other examples, you know, think tanks, those sorts of things. Obtain funding, being clear in your message as to what your research is, you know, your research question, purpose, what it's all about, findings, all those things, and to be able to do that succinctly is really, really important. Obviously, that's something that you want to, you know, increase as much as possible, the clarity when you're describing your research to potential funders. And grow your career. This is another kind of, kind of side benefit. I think that the more you talk about your research to others, whether it's could be an industry professional, somebody who works government policy, somebody in another area, the more you can do that, the more it creates awareness and you gain respect for the work that you do. I think from when I think about my former hat, we were working with potential employers in industry. One of the things I would hear a lot was, yeah, we know there's a lot of good things going on, and we don't know about it, and or we've heard, but we don't understand. And we really want to understand because we know it's good and we know it can be applied and we know we can benefit. So those are just there's way more reasons than this. These are just some of the highlights. I'm going to talk first about your research in a nutshell. So I think it's a good idea for everyone to be able to, the presenting of your research is one thing, and I'll talk about that, and this relates to the presenting. But in order to present, I think you have to have a good sense first, kind of rehearsed in your mind of what your research is all about. So I think developing a brief summary of your work is really, really important. These are just some prompting questions that you can ask yourself. Then the second part of this is know it well. So, you know, we can all write what we think our work is about, but it's another thing to, rehearse it and know it inside and out. So we're comfortable in any situation talking about it. So some prompting questions: why did you decide to do this? Is your research important? What do you know now or already? What don't you know? What's the impact? And I think kind of the what sums it all up is, why should people care? So why is this meaningful? And if you keep those questions in your mind, I think you will narrow down a good description. I talk here a little bit about elevator pitch, and you might have heard that term. It's not a term I really like, but it's a term that's widely used, which is why I'm using it. To me, all this is really just an introduction of what you do. So it's, in industry, you could relate this to, professionally to business, but you can also relate it to academic research. So really, it's a clear description of your research interests, your project, which can be shared formally or informally in diverse settings. So that's my own definition. And I underline informally because I think it's important to know that everything doesn't have to be this formal situation. There's so many opportunities out there that you may be overlooking if you make the assumption that it has to be, at an academic conference or at a formal presentation or at a formal meeting. So I give some examples here, a conversation with another researcher in your field at a conference, or maybe not in your field. Um, Part of your introduction at a meeting. Now, this is obviously where it's appropriate. I mean, not everybody introduces themselves and talks about their research, but it can be, depending on the meeting topic. That's your opportunity to talk a little bit about what you do. Could be an impromptu introduction to a guest speaker if you're at a reception and you're introduced to them, something like that. It could also be social events. So you just never know where, if somebody shows an interest and are asking questions, you want to make sure that you take advantage of that. You really don't know where those conversations are going to go, and what connections you can make through that as well. So I do have in this presentation, and at the end, if there's time, I do have the resources at the end as well. I may go into some of the links. Um, but there's several resources out there for, um, elevator pitch, pitching your research. I really like this one. This is about a 7-minute video, and it's very, very well laid out. There's exercises in it. It actually talks about, asking yourself a prompting question, then giving yourself a minute to write down all the best answers. And the person in this, who hosts this video, talks about, looking at it, your research, as a problem, solution, the benefit, and action, or call to action. So I'm not going to go into the video now, but I can share it through the chat, and of course I can share it through the resources after. It is very, very good. And even though it says, explaining your research in 1 minute, this could be 3 minutes as the 3MT. It could be just, explaining your research to non-experts. This just happens to be 1 minute, but this really sets you up for a good framework to be able to explain your research effectively. And I think the most important thing to know is that you can't possibly talk about everything. So this was a really good resource. Oops. I talk about essential tips, and I talk about some general tips. To me, these are the essential tips. So know your audience, and I know that sounds really cliche. You hear that all the time. Oh, you have to know your audience, you have to know who you're talking to, but you really do have to know your audience. It's really, really important. So tailor your language to non-experts. And this doesn't mean, yeah, I want to be careful when I talk about this too. This is not, you hear it sometimes described as dumbing down terms, which I don't like that term, but simplifying things. Yes, it's simplifying your language, but it's really more about clarity. It's not that you're assuming that you're speaking to a non-educated audience. Um, it's just that you want to make sure that they understand what you're saying. So you want to make sure that you tailor your language and really ask yourself. I think asking yourself questions is some of the best ways to do this. So obviously, how would you explain your research with using some of the prompting questions that I talked about to someone who knows nothing about it? Um, and I think that's the bottom line. I think that's where you need to start. Make it relatable. So apply to the real world uh, by using examples. And of course, I have this in quotes because this depends, right? It depends on your field, and it's not always easy to do this. In some areas, it's very easy to show the application, and others it's not. But where you can use metaphors and examples, analogies, um, read your audience. So what are they doing? Are they all on their phones? Are they, distracted? Do they look like they are interested, curious, enthusiastic? Um, I know sometimes we all, can get so immersed in our own presentations, and it's nerve-wracking as well to present that this is probably one of the last things you're thinking of. But it's important. And know too that, I mean, I could do a whole other presentation on just the um, nerves and anxiety around public speaking, but know that people are generally cheering you on. So if you're speaking, I know for me, anybody is speaking, I'm thinking I'm cheering them on in my mind. I'm thinking, oh, keep going, you're doing great. We are our own worst critics, so don't read the audience as though you're not doing a very good job. If you've practiced and you know that you're the expert, you keep going, and you know that you're doing a good job because you know the work. Avoid unnecessary detail. This is a big thing I've seen in research and academic presentations. I've seen too for non-experts. It's not such a bad thing if you're talking to folks that are in your field, but there's really no need to describe every step of your research. And if you want it to be brief, you're not going to be able to do that anyway. And you want to talk about what's most impactful. So focus on your most significant results. Again, it goes back to, excuse me, asking questions. So what was most compelling about your findings? That might not be your prompting question, but and of course it depends on what stage of your research you are. You may not even be at that stage. So whatever your questions are, or some of the most compelling things you want to talk about at that point of your research, those are the questions that you want to ask yourself. So this is just an example. Avoid academic language and jargon. Again, it's not that you don't want to title and call things what they're supposed to be called. You don't need to make things simple and call them, different names that don't make a whole lot of sense to you. But this is important because you want things to be clear and concise. So I talked a bit before in the previous slide about using analogies and examples that your audience may be familiar with. So I gave some here from this source, and I do have this in the source in the last slide. There's a lot of these things, again, a lot of these resources on the internet. This one I found really practical. So, DNA is like a spiral staircase. So if I hear that someone says that, I'm waiting for the next thing that they're going to say. I'm figuring that this is what they're relating it to. I understand that. So I'm curious to hear and what they're going to say. Electricity is like flowing water. Those are just two examples of some of the analogies that were either in that source. Um, and I made this one up myself. Well, I know what ATM is, but I made up the rest myself. Um, and remember that others may not know common terminology acronyms in your field. This goes for presenting to a non-expert audience, but it's just general for everyone, when you're speaking. So ATM in maybe chemistry, your scientific fields may mean standard atmosphere to you, but it also means automatic teller, and it's shorthand in text for at the moment, right? So that's one of several things I have seen. It's just one example that I know of. And it can be really confusing, especially when you only have a few minutes and you're trying to, put your best foot forward and make an impact and explain your research clearly. So keep those things in mind, that it may be just easier to write things out, or even just brief explanation of actually what things are. These are some general tips. Engage your audience, speak in a conversational tone. Some of these things, as I was writing them, I think, oh, I don't really need to say that. But from my experience in watching folks present, especially their research, I feel these things need to be said. So speaking in a conversational tone, so you don't want to be just reading your research. And I know that's challenging for some. Be confident and enthusiastic, because remember that you are the expert. You really are. You are the expert. You know what you're doing. You have the background. You're the best person to talk to about this topic at that point. So be confident and be enthusiastic. And remember that this can be mutually beneficial for so many reasons. Uh, I say revisit, why is this important? So, people want to hear about the great things that you're doing, your great work. Watch your body language is another. Again, I know this seems very simple. Maintain good eye contact. That's not always easy. I know when you're presenting in front of a group, that's hard, but if you can generally maintain good eye contact with the folks in the room, it's always a good idea. Be yourself. Again, cliche, but you know what? We all have our things, right? So for me, even when I'm talking, even when I'm presenting on WebEx, doesn't matter. Like, I'm still using my hands, like I think we all do that to a certain degree. We all have our own thing. It's okay to gesture. I mean, you gesture, you're not a machine. You're a human being. So I wouldn't, you don't have to get too caught up with worrying about those sorts of things. But you also don't want to be flailing your arms around, and moving around a lot. You want to watch distracting movements and smile. Again, I almost didn't put this in here, but that's really just there um, because it's meaningful. It shows. I mean, when you're speaking to somebody on the telephone, or you can't see, even when you can't see body language, when they're smiling. And there's actually, I was just recently reading research on that. Their voice is different. You sound more easygoing. You still there's a way to sound professional without being formal. This presenting everything very, very formal. So smile is just, obviously you're not going to be grinning throughout your whole presentation, but just something to keep in mind to kind of settle yourself, that this is okay. You know what you're doing. People want to hear about this. Some more tips. So this is really important. Practice if you can. Um, it's not always possible, if you're, depending on who you have around you. But if you can practice in front of a non-expert and ask them for specific feedback, so ask them questions. If there's things that you might not be on that sure of yourself, that you put in or that you spoke about that you're not sure if it's understandable, make sure you ask, and ask for a summary in their own words to ensure comprehension. And I don't mean you have to make this work, like make work project for the other person. I just mean very simple. If they can just give you a few sentences of a summary, it's just so you have, okay, they have a sense of what this is about, what I'm doing, what this means, what my findings were, whatever. And if they don't, if you're not really happy with that answer, that tells you something there, that there may be something that you need to go back to. Record yourself, especially if you're doing something that's really timing is everything, such as the 3-minute theses next week. Record yourself. There's nothing, I mean, nobody wants to see, I know I don't. I'm used to being recorded during presentations, but nobody likes to see themselves recorded. But it's a really good way to evaluate yourself, and who knows, and we all have a tendency to say, oh, I can't believe I did that, or I can't believe I did this, but who knows, you may say, oh, that was good. I did that better than I thought. So that's another way that you can practice. Illustrate. I think this is obvious to most people who are used to doing presentations. Multimedia infographics are great, and they're really good ways, particularly infographics, if you can see them. But you want to make sure that you keep them simple. So, they're easy to read and avoid a complicated, excuse me, and over detailed visuals. And by that, I mean any visuals. So pictures or photos, videos. Um, Stay on time. Again, this is another thing. Sometimes I put these things in and I'm like, I don't need to say that. Everyone, but I do need to say it because of all the presentations that I've seen that go on and on and on and on and on. And I'm not the only one. I'm sure everybody who's listening to this knows what I'm talking about. And it's a human thing. I mean, I've done it. We all kind of have a tendency to get caught up, and sometimes we don't realize the time, but it's important, especially in certain circumstances. And it's also important um, when you're trying to get a very clear message across. So you're not kind of waffling and going back to the same point, uh, because that's just going to be confusing and kind of mix up to your audience. I do have a link here in the resources that just talks about how to keep better time in your presentations. I realize that this is not always in your control. So we all know, we've gone to conferences, informal, formal presentations where we're asked to speak and it's late. All right, so we're not always speaking on time. It's not within our control. It's not our fault or responsibility. That's all you can do. You do the best you can do. But if it's up to you, and a lot of times it is solely up to you. I've seen it when it really is. It's up to the person. There's no reason why they can't stay on time. So there's lots of resources as well for that. Just going to talk a bit about slides. So I have this in bold, you'll see at the top, because I think for presenting to a non-expert audience, these couple at the top are really important. You're not presenting at an academic conference. I think I think you know that, but you need to keep that in your mind. These are not folks for they may be some, but these are not folks for the most part that will know about your work. Your slide is not a conference poster. So you probably have seen, if you've been at conferences, or even if you haven't, seen what conference posters look like, and the detail and the work and everything that goes into them. Your slide or your slides, it's not a conference poster, so it doesn't have to be that detailed. You want it to be impactful. You want it to be simplified and really, really compelling. So keep it simple and relevant. Don't overcrowd your slides. Use clear, legible fonts. So I think actually this resource here that I've included, this talks about how to make your PowerPoint presentations accessible to people with disabilities. But I think it's, regardless, I think it's good to review when you're offering a presentation, just so you're making it the best that can be, and that it's visually appealing, that people can hear, and those sorts of things. But I found this to be a really, really good resource. And one of the things, just going back to the fonts, um, they talk about in that resource is, not using cursive fonts, using perhaps Arial, Calibri, some of the clearer fonts, um, high quality images. And I think that one is obvious when you can use high quality images, because sometimes that can really um, just kind of detract from your presentation if they're not. So I took the opportunity to show you some really bad slides. Um, and I mean, this is a fine slide. I'm sure it has good information, but maybe I should say, it can be improved. I mean, you can see the source there came. It's a bit blunt. It says came from the worst presentation slides ever. But I mean, this is really about speaks to like the busyness, like the background. So having this white text over this background, I can read it if I, but it's not, it doesn't make it easy, right? So it's not easy for someone to read. So here's another example. I don't know why when I took these examples, there's borders around these, but anyway, a lot of text. So again, it's not a conference poster, and also it's just too much to read. You want to have the main points, and I'm sure we've all seen slides similar to this as well. So, and the reason why this stuff is so important is because there's a lot of great things that you want to say. There's a lot of great work you're doing, and you want to present it well. You want people to see it. You want them to understand it. And you want them to understand the impact. And you might have all these great things on your slide, but if folks are tuning out, or they really can't decipher certain things, it's really going to be hard for them to understand. So this one is quite something. Um, Again, I know this one is a bit extreme, but still, there's a lot of information in this. This one is particularly hard to see. So these are the types of things, and I think we've figured it out by now. These are the types of things that you want to avoid. I do want to draw everyone's attention to the 3MT, the Faculty of Science 3-minute theses next week. The details are on our website. It is next Monday at 11:30 in the Chemistry and Physics Building, 2039. So this is an opportunity for those of you who are not familiar with 3-minute theses for students to concisely present their research in a 3-minute period. So we have lots of, I think, the most ever competitors for the Faculty of Science this time round. We're really excited about hearing everyone's research, and I actually promoted this session to the presenters, and I noticed that that's great. I can see that some of you are here. I recognize the names, and hoping that it will help as well for next week. And as Jacqueline mentioned, this is going to be recorded, so even if some students aren't able to attend this presentation, they can watch it after. These are some of the resources. So for example, the perfect pitch, that was the YouTube video, example of analogies, making your PowerPoints accessible. There are a couple of things here. These are just resources that I didn't necessarily include. They're in the presentation itself, like these couple here. And I know, so for example, this one is related to the 3MT, 3 hints for improving presentations at the 3MT. But honestly, this could be hints for improving presentations to non-experts. So I'm going to just get out of this. Before I go into some of these links, I know we have about 20 minutes left. Are there any questions so far? Any feedback, comments? I want to show you this.
Julie, I just wanted to say there's some great
I
tips
think
in there.
this is
Thank you
it.
so much.
Okay. Can everyone see this? You can let me know. How long will the competition be? Um, Probably 2 to 3 hours. It's hard to say. It's really hard to say with 3MTs because it just depends on the presentations, and the time it takes, how long they go. But we are extending the time for our session or event this year to make it a bit longer, perhaps in a couple of hours. So it's starting at 11:30. I think most people could expect that it's going to go for 2 hours for sure. But with events like this, it could certainly go over, especially when I mean, we have over, I'm thinking right now, maybe 23 participants at the moment. Um, so, you could definitely expect 2 hours or more. So I assume everyone can see this document. This is just a PDF. This has been around for a while by Danielle Fisher. It's on the 3MT, their international website, but I really like it because it's so practical. When I did send out the information on the 3MT to competitors, I attached this um, because it's very, very straightforward, very simple. There's more things, of course, that can be said. Some of the things I've already said in the presentation. But I think if you look at this, even if 3MT wasn't at the top, so presenting your research to a non-expert audience, these are all applicable. Um, and you can see that Danielle as well, suggests kind of asking yourself questions or prompting questions, even if it's rhetorical questions. Talks about the PowerPoint slide, some of the things that I've said, and it talks about analogies. But analogies, you want to make sure that they are something that folks can identify with for sure. Speak in an engaging manner. You want to make sure that you sound interested in your topic. And chances are, if you've decided to spend all this time researching this topic, you're excited about it. So that part shouldn't be an issue. But it is really, really important. This does mention, physical appearance. I don't think it's one of the biggest things to be concerned about, but we don't want to be wearing like distracting colors and have, depending on the type of presentation it is, distracting backgrounds. Body language. This talks about standing behind the safety of the lectern. Now I know this depends on where you're presenting and how you're presenting, and there's not always like a podium to present from. But it's always great to, get out, move a bit, um, be a bit informal. It doesn't mean like you're going from one end of the room to the other so people can't keep up with you. But again, it's all part of this being engaging and conversational. Talks about summing up with having a summary. How will your research contribute to the grander goal? I think I've covered that. And the practice on everyone, anyone you can. And if everyone can understand it, and sometimes people will say they can understand it and they really don't. So this is why I think that the getting people to repeat back, even if it's a few sentences, uh, how they understand it is really, really important. And again, this talks about timing. This is old. I've been using this for a long time. You can see this came from 3MT 2012, but it's always relevant. So I wanted to share that. Now was there, let me look at something else here. Oh, the other thing too, I wanted to mention is, and I'll share this. So Memorial's YouTube channel, a lot of the departments, well, schools, sorry, and faculties um, have playlists. And if you look under the playlist here, now unfortunately YouTube, if you're familiar with it, is you probably know it's not very easy to organize. So you can see this is not very well organized. But here's the playlist for the School of Graduate Studies 3MT in 2019, and it mentions the winners as well. So you can actually see samples. And again, this is good for anyone to view who wants to learn more about talking to a non-expert audience. Because like I said, the winners are mentioned so you can see some of the better, more effective presentations. It's not just the 2019 one here. There are other competitions here over the years. There's one that was done virtually that's here as well. On the SGS 3MT website, there are the 3 winning videos of, I think it goes back to 2019, and the 2019 winner was actually from biochemistry, was from the Faculty of Science. Um, so his video is there, and that's a great one to watch if you want to watch an engaging, clear, concise, compelling video. So I just want to draw your attention to this, that there are resources out there. And I know this one particularly relates to the 3MT, but there's lots of things out there that you can have a look at. The 3MT International itself is also another good resource. Sorry, I got to plug in my computer. All right. Any questions? Excuse me for 1 second. Looks like there's something going off my bed.
So while Julie is trying to figure out computer issues like myself, I did notice that there was a question about um, how do you know what terms need to be defined? And people often come across as patronizing if they, maybe define too many terms. I guess my response to that would be that having the definition available so that the audience can understand, I think is more important. Or well, yes, more important than having a confused audience. And so I guess I would try my best to know the audience in this case. If you are presenting to if you're a biologist and you present to a general biology audience or educated audience, then perhaps defining ecology or evolution is not necessary. But if you're going something maybe more broad, then you will have to be a little bit more general in what you're defining. I know that's not a great answer, but I do feel like at least I'm never offended if
The
people
terms are
are.
specific to your discipline, to your field, then chances are you need to explain it or use other terminology. Um, you know, using maybe bigger words to describe things, whether, nouns, verbs, whatever. I don't think that's as much of an issue, but there, you really can do it without being patronizing. If you stick with the things that you know for sure, I mean, and you could even preface it with, you're aware that some folks in the audience are familiar. However, if you know you're talking to an expert audience, and you preface it with that, I mean, you're already letting people know that I recognize there may be some people who know about this here. However, I'm going to define this because this is not widely known. So hopefully that helps. Anything else? Okay. My sorry, my battery looks like it's running low, but it's plugged in. Looks like anyone has any questions or comments?
I don't know if we've lost Julie. Can anyone hear me? No. No. Okay, great. Perfect. Okay, well, yes, just breathe. That's true. I also, in my experience, think um, presenting your presentation out loud prior to, even if it's just to your cat or dog, is really helpful and helps with timing. Saying the words out loud helps you identify the sticking points. And so Julie had lots of great points today, but I just wanted to add that as something that I've felt has helped me with presentations over the years. Um, Anyone else have
I'm
any
back.
tips? Oh, hi, Julie. Julie, can you hear me?
Something was happening with my computer.
I guess not.
So I think we only have a few more participants now. Oh, okay. I'm looking at, can somebody let me know that they can hear me? I just want to make sure where I was having some technical issues. Thanks, Kelly. Um, in my experience, students struggling with timing, often speaking too fast. Yeah, any tips for that? Um, really, well, in my experience, myself, I hope I don't do it too much anymore, but I used to do that myself. Recording uh, myself and watching myself really, really helped with that because sometimes you have no idea. You think it's, you're very, very clear. And there's also the issue of accents, various accents that are, hard to understand. A lot of folks find it hard to understand different dialects and accents from Newfoundland, for example, and other places. So I think the thing that helped me was actually recording myself. And the other thing that helped me too was asking for really honest feedback, like from a friend or a family member who would say, yeah, you really need to slow down. Or particularly in this part of your presentation, this is important. You need to slow down. But I also saw that Jalissa said to breathe, and that is really, really important. It's easy for me to say. It's easy for us all to say, to breathe when we're in presentation. Lots of times it's the last thing that's on our mind. But if you can remember, even after, a few sentences, well, obviously you're breathing throughout, just to take a pause. That's another thing. Pauses are okay. In a situation where you're in the 3-minute theses now, maybe not so much, but in a general presentation to a non-expert audience, you don't have to fill the silence. We all have a tendency to think we need to fill silence. So if you've finished speaking and there's kind of silence, you've asked about, for questions, or, you don't always have to feel like you have to explain further. Sometimes some people might be taking notes, depending on the type of presentation it is, and may just need some time to digest. So if there is some silence, it's okay. I think universally we're all really uncomfortable with that. Even when we're talking to people, we want to feel like we need to fill the silence. But yes, hopefully that was helpful. And Julissa, to breathe, that's that seems so basic, but that helps with everything, doesn't it? Mark says use PowerPoint's presentation coach. Will tell you how fast. Yeah, it's a good. Yeah, and even how monotonous you are. Yeah, I mean, and sometimes that's hard too. People can't. A lot of times we can't change the way we speak. We can do our best, um, but at least it gives you some sense of how you're presenting. There are some really, really good resources. I mean, one of the things that I didn't mention actually when I talked about accessibility and good presentation, this goes for, I guess, for all presentations, is using captioning in PowerPoint. I didn't use it. I don't think the version I have, I can use it, but um, you might notice that a lot now. People are using closed captioning and not just in recording, actually, as they're speaking. Um, so that can make the presentation a lot clearer and more accessible as well. But yeah, there are some really good resources in some of the newer PowerPoint versions. Pauses are great to allow time to digest the information. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. You don't need to keep going and going and going. Yeah. Yep, that's right. Right. Well, we only have about 5 minutes left. I usually try to make presentations a little bit shorter than what they need to because there's questions and I'm sure everybody's busy and have other things to do. And I just want to make sure that you get the right information, the information that you need. I know this will be recorded and the links, I did show you a couple of links, the links are on the last page. Um, if anybody wants me to share the links, I'm happy. Actually, I'm going to put my email in the chat. I'm happy to do that as well because I know, I'm going through them and they're in the slides, but it's also good to have for yourself. Oh, I'm glad it was helpful, Jacqueline. All right. Well, thanks very much, everybody. I enjoyed doing this. I think this is a really important topic, and I hope that it was beneficial. I hope some things you got something out of it anyway. Something was beneficial for you. And good luck to everyone next week for 3MT, and hope this helped. You're welcome, Dahlia.